When I left my parents' house for the last time, I didn't cry. I didn't beg or explain. I just packed my things, shut the door behind me, and stepped into a future they no longer wanted me to share. I remember the weight of that moment, the quiet slam of the door, the hollow echo in the hallway, and the faint smell of my mother's cinnamon-scented air freshener clinging to the walls. It was a sound that still haunts me. The sound of being erased. I never thought I'd be the one walking away from the family home. The one branded a burden, a mooch, the loser in my own bloodline. But that's exactly how it felt. And it wasn't until years later, when I heard how everything had fallen apart without me, that I understood the full truth. The truth they never wanted to admit. I wasn't the problem. I was the lifeline. Before all this, life at my parents' house was quiet, almost peaceful in its own way. I was 25, soft-spoken, and not the kind to stir drama. My world revolved around computers, lines of code, and the hum of servers humming in the spare room. My little tech business that I ran from the basement. It was a modest setup, but enough to keep me busy. And more importantly, it paid the bills $2,500 every month, quietly wired into their accounts. They never really asked where it came from, or maybe they didn't want to know. Mom and Dad's house smelled of old wood and lavender. Dad's gardening soap mixed with Mom's signature vanilla candles. My brother Ryan, 2 years older, was the loud one in the family, full of swagger and quick to judge. His wife, Megan, was sharp, opinionated, and not shy about calling me out as the family freeloader. They thought they owned everything: Mom and Dad's money, their house, their lives, and to them, I was just a stain. Every morning, I'd wake early, make my usual cup of black coffee, the kind that leaves a bitter edge on your tongue, and slip into my small office. The walls were plastered with screens, cables, and scribbled notes in my handwriting. I loved what I did. I loved the calm hum of technology. It was my sanctuary. But under the surface, I was just trying to keep us afloat. Dinner times were tense. Ryan and Megan dominated the table with their loud debates and side remarks about my uselessness. Mom would try to keep the peace, serving her homemade spaghetti with extra garlic, a small smile masking her worry. Dad sat quietly, the furrow in his brow growing deeper with each passing day. I remember the way Megan would glance at me from across the table, her eyes sharp and dismissive. Once she said quietly, "You're just living off them. It's pathetic." Ryan nodded, smirking like he had the right to judge me when he hadn't earned a cent himself. But I kept my head down. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was helping in my own way, that one day, they'd see the truth. The first crack appeared subtly. It was a cold evening in November when Ryan's tone shifted. We were all in the living room, the fire crackling faintly, but the warmth didn't reach me. Ryan threw a glance my way, but it wasn't the usual teasing. It was colder, sharper. "Mom, Dad," he said, voice low and steady. "Have you ever thought about what it means to have Haley living here? I mean, she's 25, still mooching off you. What message does that send?" Mom's eyes flickered toward me, uncertain. Dad shifted in his chair, silent. I tried to brush it off, focusing on the quiet crackle of the fire. But that night, the seed was planted. From then on, Megan made sure the message was clear. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about control, about who had the right to the house, to the money, to the family name. I felt the cold stares when I walked into rooms, the whispered conversations that stopped when I approached. The tension built like a slow storm. One afternoon, I found a note stuck to the fridge. It wasn't meant for me. Megan's handwriting, sharp and deliberate. "Parents must see sense. Haley can't keep freeloading. It's time." I folded it slowly, the paper crisp between my fingers. My hands trembled, but I hid it well. I confronted Mom later that day, in the kitchen, the smell of burnt toast filling the air. Her eyes were red, her voice soft but firm. "Haley, we love you, but Ryan and Megan, they're worried. They think you're holding us back." I felt the sting, like a cold blade sliding under my ribs. "Mom," I whispered, "I pay the bills. I keep this house running." She looked away, silence hanging between us. The confrontation came faster than I expected. One evening, Ryan cornered me by the front door, his jaw tight. "You need to leave, Haley," he said flatly. "You're tearing this family apart." I shook my head, voice quiet but steady. "I'm the one keeping this place afloat." He laughed bitterly. "Not anymore. We've talked to Mom and Dad. They agree. You're out." That night, I packed my things with numb fingers. The quiet hum of my laptop was the last sound I heard before the door shut behind me forever. Leaving wasn't easy. The cold night air bit at my skin as I stepped onto the porch one last time. the weight of years and memories heavy in my chest. I glanced back at the house, our house, the place where I'd grown up, where every corner held a story, a whisper of laughter, or an argument I tried to ignore. But that night, it was just silence. The next morning, I sat in a small, rented apartment not far from the city. The walls bare, except for a single poster of an old sci-fi movie I loved. My laptop was open, the familiar hum filling the quiet room. I had no family there. No one except myself, and the promise of rebuilding. I thought about calling Mom or Dad, maybe explaining things one last time. But the anger in Ryan's voice echoed too loud in my ears. I knew they had made their choice. At first, I threw myself into work harder than ever. The business I'd quietly built from my parents' basement, fixing computers, programming websites, managing small networks, started to grow. Without the distraction of family drama, I found clarity. I spent late nights coding, troubleshooting, building client relationships over the phone and video calls. I remember the smell of instant noodles at 2 a.m., the soft glow of the screen illuminating my tired eyes. I was tired, but I was free. For the first time, I was in control of my life, and that felt like a kind of healing. Meanwhile, back at the house, I heard through a cousin that things were unraveling fast. Mom's hands was shaking more, the scent of her vanilla candles replaced by the sharper smell of cleaning sprays, as if she was trying to scrub away the growing tension. Dad looked older, quieter, spending hours in his garden, his back stooped like a man carrying invisible burdens. Ryan's marriage was fraying too. Megan's sharp tongue and restless energy turned inward, their arguments growing louder, more frequent. I tried not to let it poison me, but sometimes late at night, when the loneliness crept in, I wondered if I'd done the right thing. One evening, about 2 years after I left, I met someone, a kind, gentle man named James. He had a quiet smile and a laugh that felt like home. We connected over coffee shops, long walks, and the kind of conversations that make you feel seen. James didn't know my family history, and I didn't tell him at first. I was afraid the bitterness would taint our new beginning. We got married 2 years later in a small ceremony, surrounded by a handful of friends. I wore a simple white dress, the one thing I'd never worn before in my life, a wedding dress. I felt like I was finally stepping into the life I deserved. Our first child was born a year later. Holding her in my arms, feeling her tiny fingers curl around mine, I knew I created something different, something unbreakable. James and I built a life grounded in respect, love, and quiet strength. The smell of fresh baby powder and the soft cooing sounds filled our home, washing away the ghosts of my past. I was healing, but the past has a way of coming back, doesn't it? About 5 years after I left, I received a call that shattered the fragile peace I'd built. It was Mom. Her voice was weak, trembling. "Haley, we lost the house." Her words hung in the air like a thunderclap. "What do you mean, Mom?" "We're bankrupt, Haley. Ryan. It's all falling apart." I sat in stunned silence. The family who had cast me out, the family that believed I was their burden, was now drowning in the very chaos I had tried to save them from. I didn't rush to them. I let the silence stretch, feeling no obligation to rush back into a storm I'd already survived. But later, I heard how Ryan's life was unraveling too, his marriage collapsing under the weight of bitterness and blame, the house sold off to cover debts, the childless emptiness growing between him and Megan as they fought through a nasty divorce. It was a cruel twist of fate, the kind that leaves scars. Through it all, I held on to my peace. I wasn't angry anymore, not really. I'd built a life that was mine, a family I loved, and a future I was proud of. I sometimes wonder if Ryan and Megan ever realized the truth, that the sister they scorned, the mooch they evicted, was the one who kept their world from falling apart. That the money I quietly sent every month wasn't charity, it was survival. It wasn't easy, walking away from everything I knew. I felt like I was abandoning a sinking ship. And maybe, in a way, I was. But sometimes, you have to let the ship go under so you can find a new one that floats. After that call from Mom, the one where she told me they'd lost the house, I didn't reach out immediately. I needed space to breathe, to gather my thoughts, to understand what I really felt. I wasn't the little sister anymore, the quiet girl who lived in their basement. I was someone who had carved out her own life from the ashes. What struck me most about those years after I left was how much I changed, not just in circumstance, but inside. The quiet humiliation of being called a burden had taught me resilience, but it also made me fiercely protective of my peace. I remember mornings in our small home, the faint aroma of brewed coffee drifting in from the kitchen. James would hum softly as he made breakfast, and our daughter would tug at my sleeve, her bright eyes full of wonder. These moments were my new reality, far from the cold accusations and whispered gossip I'd left behind. Sometimes, I wonder if Mom and Dad ever truly understood what happened. Ryan and Megan had convinced them that I was the problem, that I was draining them financially and emotionally. But what they didn't realize was that without my quiet support, without the money I sent every month, everything began to crumble. I heard from a mutual relative that Mom had stopped her gardening, her hands once so skilled now trembling too much to hold a trowel. Dad, who once spent weekends pruning roses and planting vegetables, retreated into silence. The house, once filled with warmth and laughter, felt empty and cold. Ryan, of course, didn't fare well either. I heard about the fights, the bitter words that spilled like poison between him and Megan. Their marriage, once the shining example in the family, dissolved under the weight of financial ruin and resentment. The house they'd bought on credit was gone, sold to pay off debts. And worse, their dreams of children, the laughter and light that should have filled their home, never came. That silence was a wound they couldn't heal. It's strange, isn't it? How sometimes the people who push you away the hardest are the ones who need you the most. And how those you least expect to be your salvation become the very foundation you build your life upon. I never sought revenge. There was no grand gesture, no public confrontation. I simply moved on, built my life with quiet determination. I created a family rooted in love and respect, far from the toxicity I'd left behind. One day, out of the blue, Mom called again. This time, her voice was softer, filled with regret. "Haley, I'm sorry. We were wrong. We didn't see the truth." I listened, but my heart was guarded. "Mom," I said gently, "I hope you find peace. I truly do." And with that, I hung up. There's a lesson in all this one I carry with me every day. Family isn't just blood or shared history. It's the love we choose to give and receive. Sometimes, the hardest thing to do is walk away from those who hurt us. But that distance can be the space we need to heal. And sometimes, the person you think is the burden is actually the one holding everything together. The truth came out slowly, but when it did, it felt like a tidal wave crashing through every memory I had of them. I remember sitting in the quiet corner of a cafe when a cousin, hesitant but unable to hold it in, leaned over and said, "Haley, they're broke. The house is gone. Ryan's marriage is falling apart, all because they cut you off." My coffee sat untouched as the words sank in. I wanted to ask more, but somehow, the details didn't matter as much as the reality. The family that had pushed me out, called me a leech, and kicked me to the curb was unraveling without me. The financial support I had quietly provided had been their lifeline, and now it was gone. That revelation brought a complicated mix of emotions. I wasn't triumphant. I wasn't gloating. I was tired. Tired of being misunderstood. Tired of the quiet battles I'd fought just to be seen as more than a mooch. But mostly, I felt a strange sense of sorrow. For Mom and Dad, who had lost so much pride and security. For Ryan, whose bitterness had turned inward and burned what little happiness he had. And even for Megan, caught in a spiral of blame and frustration. The hardest part was realizing how much pain we'd all caused each other without ever truly talking. There were so many unspoken things, resentments, assumptions, silent judgments that built walls between us. The money was never the real problem. It was what the money represented. Control, respect, and belonging. I thought about calling them, trying to bridge the gap, but I held back. Forgiveness takes time, and sometimes distance is the first step. Instead, I focused on my family, James, our children, and the life we'd nurtured from the ground up. We moved into a house filled with light and laughter, where my daughter's footsteps echoed against the walls like a promise of new beginnings. I found peace in the little things, the smell of freshly baked bread in the morning, the warmth of my son's small hand in mine, the quiet strength of a love that didn't come with conditions or expectations. I often think about what I would say to Ryan if we ever crossed paths again. Maybe I'd tell him I'm sorry for the distance, but also remind him that sometimes love isn't about holding on. It's about knowing when to let go. I'd tell him that family isn't about perfect histories or shared wealth. It's about understanding, compassion, and respect. This story isn't just mine. It's a story about what happens when people forget that beneath every label, mooch, burden, loser, there's a person trying to survive, to be seen, to belong. And sometimes, the ones who seem weakest are the ones keeping everything together. After the truth settled like dust on my shoulders, I realized that the story wasn't over, not really. Life moves forward, but shadows of the past linger, whispering reminders of what once was and what might have been. I still hear Ryan's voice sometimes, sharp and accusing, the way he used to say I was a drain on the family, an ungrateful parasite. It used to cut deep, but now it feels distant like echoes from a place I left behind. The moment I finally let go of the anger was subtle. It wasn't a grand epiphany, but a quiet understanding that bitterness would only chain me to the past. I wanted more for myself, for my children, for a future built on hope, not resentment. So, I chose forgiveness, not for their sake, but for mine. I decided to reach out to Mom and Dad once more, not to rejoin their lives, but to close the chapter with kindness. I called one Sunday afternoon, the sun warm against my skin and the faint smell of lilacs drifting through the open window. "Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad," I began, my voice steady. They were surprised, but something in the quiet on the other end told me they were listening. We talked for hours that day about the past, the mistakes, the hurt, and the misunderstandings. I told them about my life, about James and the kids, about the peace I'd found. They apologized not just for the eviction, but for not seeing me, really seeing me. It was the first step toward healing, even if the road ahead was still long. Ryan never apologized. He never reached out. Maybe he's still tangled in his bitterness. Or maybe pride keeps him from admitting he was wrong. I don't know. What I do know is that family isn't always perfect or complete. Sometimes it's fractured, messy, and painful. But sometimes it can be forgiven. I learned that being seen and valued doesn't come from others. It comes from within. I am more than their judgment, more than the labels they gave me. And in the end, that's what saved me. Not long after that call, life settled into a quieter rhythm. I was no longer the invisible sister lurking in the background or the unwanted mooch. I was a wife, a mother, a woman who had carved her own space in the world with hands that had once trembled but now moved with steady purpose. There's a peacefulness in building something with your own two hands, in nurturing a family on your own terms. I never sought to rebuild what was lost with my birth family, but I found a new kind of family, one built on mutual respect, love, and understanding. News of my parents' bankruptcy and the loss of the family home spread quietly through relatives and acquaintances. Some approached me with awkward apologies, others with whispered gossip. But I stayed silent. Justice, I realized, isn't about shouting from rooftops or rubbing salt in wounds. It's about dignity. It's about letting the truth speak for itself. Ryan's life continued down a difficult path. Divorce papers arrived in the mail months later, and the house he once dreamed of was sold off to cover debts. I heard the bitterness in the few conversations he allowed others to overhear, a bitterness that seemed to consume him. I felt no joy in his downfall. Instead, I felt a profound sadness for the man who had let pride and resentment blind him to the one who had silently kept them afloat. One afternoon, as I watched my children play in the garden, I reflected on how fragile family can be, how easily it can fracture under pressure and misunderstanding. But I also saw something else: resilience. I saw that even when blood ties break, love can still grow in unexpected places. I'm not perfect. I still carry scars from those years, the harsh words, the rejection, the feeling of being unwanted. But I've learned that sometimes the greatest strength is in letting go. Letting go of anger, of expectations, and of those who refuse to see your worth. The lesson I want to share is this: sometimes, the ones we think are our burdens are actually our greatest blessings. And sometimes, the ones who push us away most harshly need us more than they'll ever admit. As the years passed, I found peace in the little things, the sound of my children's laughter echoing through the house, the warmth of James's hand in mine during quiet evenings, the smell of fresh bread baking in the oven on Sunday mornings. These moments stitched together the life I had fought to build. A life far removed from the cold halls of my childhood home. I never sought reconciliation with Ryan. Our paths had diverged too far, tangled in too much hurt. But I carried no bitterness toward him. Instead, I held hope that one day he might find the peace I had found. One afternoon, while sorting through old boxes, I stumbled upon a faded photograph of all of us. Mom, Dad, Ryan, and me taken in better days. I traced the edges with a gentle finger, the smiles frozen in time, both warm and haunting. That picture reminded me of what family can be when love and understanding replace suspicion and judgment. It was a reminder that beneath every conflict, there's a shared history, a bond that, though strained, remains. I learned that family isn't just about who stays close or who walks away. It's about the threads that connect us, the stories we carry, the memories we cherish, and the lessons we learn along the way. Most of all, I learned that sometimes, the hardest goodbyes are the ones that set us free. To those listening, I ask, have you ever been cast out by those you love? Have you ever been misunderstood or judged unfairly? And if so, how did you find your way back to peace? I hope my story offers a quiet comfort that sometimes walking away is the beginning of coming home. If this story touched you, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Your stories matter, and together, we find strength in shared experiences. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying with me through this story. A story about family, judgment, and the quiet strength it takes to walk away when you're no longer seen. Haley's journey reminds us all that sometimes, the people we label as burdens are carrying more weight than we realize. And sometimes, the greatest act of love is knowing when to let go. I want to leave you with this question. Have you ever been misunderstood or cast out by those closest to you? How did you find your way through that pain? I'd love to hear your stories because in sharing, we heal. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing and joining the community where we listen, reflect, and support each other through life's complexities. Your voice matters. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.